The world will never be the same after 2020. This may well be the most pivotal moment in our generation's history in terms of the social and economic changes that are on the horizon. So much so that in the future, people will talk about the world before 2020 and the world after it. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the downright frightening aspects of this brave new world. Let's get to it. Before we dive into this video in mid-April of 2020, we need to appreciate that while some progress has been made in arresting the spread in certain parts of the world, that we are only in the beginning stages of what's going to be a long and drawn-out battle, which is going to come in successive waves throughout the next 18 months. This is a rapidly evolving situation, and we're still nowhere near the apex of this crisis. As this channel's primary focus is on emergency preparedness, it's safe to say that one of the most positive things that will come out of this global tragic crisis is that it has had the effect of rekindling people's interest in self-sufficiency, emergency preparedness, and has provided the average person with a greater understanding of the vulnerabilities inherent in our current socio-economic paradigm. Most of the world got caught with its pants down in this crisis, all of them relying on the just-in-time delivery system to meet their primary needs. And while we should be realistic in our expectations of people and plan that most people will just become complacent again after a year, I do think that the stigma against the prepper will subside in the years after this crisis. And I do believe that preparedness in general will become far more refined and precise in its theory and applications. There was a time when lockdowns were only for prisoners. After 2020, this idea of putting people into lockdown will enter the global cultural lexicon, and people will acquiesce to this idea of going into lockdown much easier in the future now that we've already been exposed to the process. Mass quarantines like this have now become normalized, and I wouldn't be surprised if lockdowns were imposed more readily to deal with situations that have nothing to do with stifling the spread of infectious disease. Now, in most places, many of these measures are still optional. However, there are places where it isn't optional and where you're actually fined or sent to jail if you do violate these stay-at-home laws, even though in places where it's that bad, there are few police to enforce those laws and few corrections officers to watch over you if and when you do ever make it to jail. And while this has proven to be an effective method at slowing the spread of the transmission of this deadly viral outbreak, many governments around the world have been criticized for exploiting this crisis to abuse and subject their populations to harsh draconian measures that are disproportionate to the threat. This is not to say that the threat isn't real or is overblown. These governments may justify these heavy-handed tactics as the only way to protect their less than compliant populations against this devastating viral menace. Nonetheless, this will inspire many conversations about the ethics of mandatory travel restrictions in the face of global crisis. It should go without saying that there's going to be a lot of economic hardship on the horizon. We will see record levels of unemployment around the world and a total restructuring of how and where and by whom goods are manufactured and distributed around the world. Many countries and their people will go into considerable debt throughout this lockdown process, which will take years to recover from. In order to pay down these debts and balance the books due to the lack of taxes that the governments are accruing during this crisis, austere measures will be employed around the world. And as has been the case throughout history, austerity typically breeds unrest. I foresee this being a pivotal moment in how things are manufactured. I do foresee that we will go back to a more localized economy, but it's not going to be what people think. The majority of these jobs will be automated. Many companies will likely rebuild from the ground up to have the majority of their manufacturing process automated, employing new robotics technologies, artificial intelligence. This revolution in automation will make many human workers obsolete. Companies who will be forced to rebuild from the ground up will view it as a more lucrative investment to invest in these machines from the get-go rather than trying to recreate the low-income sweatshop model which allowed us to get those cheap products from overseas for so many years. The only way manufacturing of commodities comes back to Western nations is by automation, or by bringing in workers to do the work at the lowest income possible. The fact is, as much as people have these pie-in-the-sky notions that everybody is going to make $20 an hour building iPhones, pressures from a consumer market which has been groomed and entitled to think that you can get one of these smartphones for under $1,000 is not going to be willing to pay $5,000 to have it done. Thus, the only way to have it manufactured here is to have it manufactured by robots. This crisis will be the single biggest catalyst to the advent of true automation, which is going to dislocate a lot of people out of the workforce. And of course, that will have dire economic repercussions, at least in the short term. This will in turn force the complete restructuring of China's workforce as well. This will likely escalate tensions between superpowers who currently are economically intertwined. Global trade, as unfair as many people think it is, doesn't get enough credit for its role in preventing World War III. This will be the single biggest catalyst towards the automation that everybody has been talking about for years that's coming. Correspondingly, we started to see many countries giving their taxpayers their money back and calling it universal basic income. If universal basic income ever had an opportunity to take root, it will certainly have been at the outset of this major crisis, which is going to force local automation, one in which record levels of unemployment are going to demand it to prevent civil unrest. There will likely be lingering social programs which are brought in to mitigate this unemployment issue, which likely will be the seeds for full-blown universal basic income in the future. In this time of mass lockdown, most people are ordering things online. This may well put the nail in the coffin for most brick-and-mortar stores. The businesses that are going to do well in the future are ones that are online, courier companies to transport goods. This may be the point in time in which we finally see the drone delivery systems get their licenses and take to the skies to deliver all of the life-sustaining things that we will need while we're stuck in our home watching reruns on Netflix for the next 2 years because they haven't been able to make any new movies and programs throughout this whole crisis. I don't doubt that at some point these will also be used, as they have in places like China and Italy, to enforce bylaws and ticket people to generate money for the government that it's going to need to pay back all the money it's going to owe after this is all over. Amazon, a company who already employs a lot of automation in their warehouses, plans on hiring another 100,000 people, many of which will likely have been dislocated from the brick-and-mortar shops due to the shutdowns. What we are also going to see is that many businesses are going to realize how much cheaper it is to have people work from home, such that many people who are able to do the majority of work from home right now will likely continue to do so. This whole process will be fostered by the next generation of 5G telecoms and will improve a lot of businesses' margins if they don't have to provide an office and pay a lease or buy a building to house their employees in. This, of course, will entail a whole new patchwork of labor laws and methods that employers use to gauge the performance of their employees. Will also likely see a shift in education to one which is far more remote and, at least in the short term, less hands-on until the technology of virtual reality and augmented reality catches up. We also may see a cashless society. Cash is going to be feared for its ability to be a fomite, which makes it essentially a vector for the transmission of disease. What will be put in its place? I don't know. It very much could be some form of cryptocurrency or pseudo-cryptocurrency in the case of Facebook Libra that facilitates transactions in the future. The new culture of social distancing and the bylaws that accompany it are going to totally reshape the commercial landscape. It is likely that for the foreseeable future, there will be some restrictions on the gatherings of large amounts of people, or perhaps a requirement that if a person were to partake in these larger scale group activities like going to a sporting event or a movie theater, that they might need to be approved and cleared of having any infectious disease before attending these events. Now, it's hard for me to foresee a pathway to this kind of draconian measure to be employed, but I do think that there are going to be many requirements of those who do partake in these events, if they ever are allowed again, period. Even if we do have these restrictive bylaws for the next couple years, that's long enough to totally reshape many industries, and it's likely that it's going to cost them too much to go back to the way things were before. What does this mean for cruise ships, airplanes, movie theaters, fitness centers, shopping malls, food courts, arenas, church congregations, even protests? What sorts of enduring prohibitions will limit the gatherings of large groups of people? We can expect that even if there are no laws put in place, that people have already been so conditioned to social distancing that it's going to be a very difficult habit to shake, and it's quite likely that the public will synoptically enforce it themselves without requiring any laws to do so. And it's safe to say that those guiding stickers on the floors in the supermarkets and the splash guards that are there to protect cashiers, I don't think those are going anywhere anytime soon. These barriers will become the new normal, and they too will become more refined. We're going to see even more media consumption as people become more hardwired into the matrix as they work from home and live from home. This all comes at a time when virtual reality is really starting to kick off, so that's where I see the 5G smart grid coming into play and will permit people to have experiences which are engaging enough that they're not getting cabin fever and going crazy. There will most definitely be greater management on the information that you consume. We've seen that with the algorithm this time around, where any video which talked about this particular subject was immediately flagged by the algorithm and demonetized, and of course you are then suggested other official sources which can tell you the quote-unquote truth about what is going on. We're going to see the acceptance of the disclosure of our personal data to the government. Throughout this outbreak, several countries have been using people's cell phones to collect aggregate data, which they claim it's only aggregate. That means that they don't take any personalized data from you, and they're using that to do contact tracing so that they can monitor the spread. Obviously, many civil liberties advocates view this problematically. We may see enduring mandatory travel restrictions and limitations on how much you can travel, where you can travel to, where you can stay. There may also be limitations on certain purchases. There may be a rationing of supplies, at least for the foreseeable future. There's definitely already limits on how much stuff you can buy in grocery stores. Even though they say there is not a food shortage problem, there most definitely is, due to the slowdown in production and manufacturing, which has come with having most of the people on lockdown. There may actually be laws against hoarding and panic buying. We're likely going to see some form of mandatory healthcare take place, whether that be by way of forced vaccinations or forced testing even. There likely will be some changes to public health systems around the world, especially in terms of how insurance works as it pertains to pandemics. And last but certainly not least, the war on the invisible enemy will come to replace the war on terror, the war on drugs, or the war on other things, because we need to have a war on something in order to keep our economy propped up. Let me know what you think is going to change after this pandemic subsides in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.